It's a real honor to be with you today. I must admit it's kind of a day off for me. Pete invited me to speak, and I kind of jumped at the opportunity to get off campus and talk about something I love so much. So I appreciate the opportunity. It's really an honor for me. I'd certainly like to welcome everyone, and I agree. I'm just so impressed with the planning committee and their efforts and how they put this together. It's just going to be very, very impactful, especially tomorrow's summit on policy. I think that's exactly where this needs to go. So just really want to thank the committee for all the hard work. I used to be in Extension, field specialist, and worked a long time traveling the back roads of South Dakota in Extension, and I know what it takes to put on something like this, and I'm really impressed. I must say I've got to call out a couple of things. This is a big conference room, but this part of it I think is called the Oscar Howe part of the convention center, and that's really important. Oscar Howe was an American Indian, Dakota, grew up in with part of the Yankton tribe, one of the finest artists in the history of South Dakota, probably of the nation. We were pleased at South Dakota State to host last summer an Oscar Howe show that was sponsored by the Smithsonian Institute. That's how much they think of, nationally, they think of Oscar Howe. It toured the country in 3 places: New York City, Seattle, and Brookings. And so we were really pleased about that. Talk about good things happening on campus. That was a real treat for us. So Oscar Howe is here with us today, and as those of us who came in from the east, we got to see Dignity. Last night when Jane and I drove in, the sun was just right, shining through her star quilt, and it was really beautiful. And so I think it's only fitting that it's important that we do a land acknowledgement, and that we recognize that the land that we are going to be talking about over these 2 days was the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Osheta-Shakowee people. That means 7 council fires of the people that are typically called Sioux. And so it's really important for us to know our history and to know and appreciate the indigenous culture, the indigenous knowledge that those people have, and incorporate it into everything we do. So I'm glad to acknowledge the historical part of the land that we're going to be talking about and celebrating. I want to congratulate the people who put together the song and the video and the ads that are on TV now of Where Good Things Grow. It's my favorite song. It's just beautiful. It tells this incredible story that really reaches all of us, and just really, really fun to listen to. I've sent it to friends all over the country, and the video, and I guess the video's up for a national award, and I certainly hope it wins. So there's a couple quotes in the video. The next slide has some quotes. You won't have to fix what you don't break, and we all reap what we sow. And how true is that? And I grew up with a grandfather on that ranch that he also said both of those things over and over again, especially the time I tried to drive a 30-foot dump brake through a 29-foot gate. And I figured out that thing. The next one is, if you had time to do it over, you had time to do it right. He told me that about 1,000 times, I think. So as I fixed as probably a 13-year-old boy, had to rebuild both of those corner posts and rebuild all that and help to fix the rake. Certainly, the song reminded me of all of that I grew up with. So the next slide is a picture of my grandfather, and he was born on the Rosebud. He was Lakota. He first in his family, born in 1892, south of what's now Winter, in a town called Lamoureux, which doesn't exist anymore, but Lamoureux Township is in Tripp County. And first in his family to attend high school. He was a boarding school guy. He and his brother, Howard. He was a cowboy. He rode in the last open range roundups where they cleared the reservations of the Texas cattle to open up the reservations for homesteading. He worked in the stockyards and a cattle buyer. He was a rancher. And he wouldn't understand what holistic means at all, except for he was. He absolutely lived it. He understood in the very roots of himself what grasslands and rangelands and cattle were all about. He wasn't a very tall man, but he stood arrow straight, and so were his ethics and his core values. Just to tell you a little bit about how he interacted with the land, he put together a really nice ranch, and in the coming out of World War II, a lot of the land that he was able to get a hold of had been farmed by homesteaders who then left during the dirty 30s, and it was in really tough shape, invaded very badly. He called it go back, land that had already started that first ecological succession. And he planted hundreds and hundreds, I'm not sure it's thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of acres of that back to grass. And that was in the 1940s and 1950s. And who does that in the 1940s and 50s? Well, he did. And he also, there was several pieces of land, large blocks of land, that after he got the crested wheatgrass started, he actually interseeded it with big bluestem, Indian grass, and switchgrass. Again, in 1950, whatever, who does that? Well, that's the root of the conservation ethic that I have, was a man who would do that kind of thing. He planted trees till his grandsons grew up, and they weren't available to hoe weeds anymore. So the three of us kind of petered out, and so did his tree planting. But he was a tremendous man, and when you visited him, he had every Western Horseman, right, Dave? Western Horseman, the Hereford Journal, the Quarter Horse Journal, Successful Farmer, Beef Magazine. They were all magazines, and I read every one of them cover to cover every month. Or if I'd been gone, I would come back with Grandpa and Grandma and read all those magazines. And amongst those magazines were these 6. They're called booklets that the Phillips Petroleum produced in the 1950s. And they were a fantastic influence on me. So I'm 10 or 12 or 13 years old looking through Western Horsemen when I'm not fixing that corner post, and then reading about grasses. And if you get a chance, these are classical booklets about range, and they're just, you can get them online now, but they're actually kind of rare. But that's the kind of person I grew up with. He was all about cattle and horses and agriculture, but mostly it was about grass. And so that's certainly what I was influenced by as I grew up. So those booklets were produced by Phillips Petroleum Company, and they had a large ranch in Oklahoma. And if you take the roots back through the Phillips Petroleum Company, they actually owned what is now the Romeo Park Ranch that Ted Turner owned, and the Philmont Boy Scout Ranch. That was all one Spanish land grant. So the Phillips Petroleum was really involved. Of course, they were pumping oil off of all of it, but they were very involved in grasslands and produced those beautiful books. It brought to mind the books that really had influenced me, and I've talked about books in some of my other talks about how important they were to me. The one in your upper right-hand corner, the books that Jim Johnson and Gary Larson put together, really the first books that had quality photography that described grasses as beautiful, and they're still available. Just a beautiful, Gary was a botanist for South Dakota State, and of course Jim was a range extension specialist. But those books made a huge impact on my life, and the one underneath that is the HRM book that Alan Savory wrote, and I was privileged to spend a week with Alan Savory in his courses and talk to him several times. He was on campus a couple years, Sandy, 10 years ago, more than that. Just a fantastic man. But of all the books that I want to talk about, there's a book called Range Grasses and Plants of the Northern Prairie. And this is the book. And you can go to the next slide. So it's written by Clarence Nollett. Clarence Nollett grew up in Todd County, first of his family to attend and graduate from high school. He was a veteran of the Korean War, farmer, rancher, photographer, grassland expert, author that hardly anybody knew. He was a fantastic man. I knew him through our work in conservation together, at conservation banquets, at meetings. Would talk to him at the Valentine Sale Barn, and he and his brother, and just had a great relationship with Clarence. And Clarence decided to write a book. He was in his 70s, and if you go to the next slide, he put together this book all by himself. He took every picture in it. It was first published as a three-ring binder, and a few of you may have seen it. He sent it to me in about the year 2000, and I was just really privileged to have it, and it was really cool, I thought. And I read it then, and then in 2019, right before he died, 2017, right before he passed away, it was published, and I don't think there's very many copies. I tried to get copies for everybody, but there aren't any left, really, as I understand it. But it is really something special. So Clarence took every picture himself. He wrote essays, he quoted poetry, he quoted great literature. He wrote long dissertations about how we should manage land and why we should do it. So I thought about reading you the book this morning. It's that good, but I won't. But I do want to share some quotes with you. Clarence was a very diminutive person. He's about this tall, and he was so quiet, you wouldn't even know he was in the room. And yet he did this incredible work. So if the next slide is a quote about the importance that he found in Grasslands. I want to create awareness, stimulate curiosity, and help to develop an understanding and appreciation for things I found in our surrounds. I love the way he said that. I hope that some of what I may write will help inspire future generations. And so who does that? It wasn't his job, was it? He was a farmer, rancher. He didn't get paid to do it. He didn't write a grant to do it. He just did it. He didn't get promoted. And as I said, he took every picture in the book with a very rudimentary camera, evidently. I tried to take some pictures of it, out of it, to promote or to use today, and they just weren't high quality enough. And I talked to his younger brother. Clarence was the oldest of 6, and he's in a nursing home, and I couldn't get any more pictures of Clarence other than that one when he was in service. But so I thought I'd share with you his hope for us, and that's the next slide. When I'm gone, I want to leave more than just my name chiseled on a piece of granite. I want to pass on and share some of the things that I've enjoyed or found pleasure in. And the next slide, his message to us. Ranchers and farmers not only have an obligation to provide for stewardship of the land and its plants and wildlife, but share the obligation to conserve and encourage the prudent use of our other resources. He wrote beautifully, and I don't think it was edited. Maybe his sister-in-law might have helped him, but he was an incredible writer too. Has anyone ever said it more clearly, more succinct? And I think the answer is no. No one better anyway. Clarence Nollett is one of my heroes. I was blessed to know him. I am so grateful that he thought of me and sent me these books, and I wrote to him afterwards about, why me? Why did he share this with me? And I bring it up because I can't the only way Clarence's incredible stewardship and conservation and his impact is for me to share this with you, and I wish I had 300 copies that I could give to you, because it's absolutely inspirational that a person would go through it took him 10 years to put this together, and he did it just because he loved the grasslands, just like we all do. So he's my hero, Clarence Nollet, from Todd County, South Dakota. Another one of my heroes is on the next slide, and you will recognize Neil Bean, of course, from Veblen, South Dakota. One of the finest ranches, I've been on a lot of ranches in my life, finest ranches I've ever been on. It's right on the tip of the Prairie Coteau. He won the Leopold Conservation Award a couple years ago, and he's an incredible rancher, but most importantly, he's an incredible teacher, just like Clarence. He's shown here with his grandson, Nate, who's carrying on the operation, and I think all of us who know him are so grateful that Nate is there taking over. So on the next slide, Neil describes what the ecological processes of the grasslands are. Grazing animals apply manure with little soil disturbance and disperse it broadly, making it readily available to be cycled by soil biology. Thus, we're always thinking in terms of plant life, microbes, and soil biology, and cycling manure and growing healthy and well-performing livestock. Just like Clarence, Neil described this ecological process as well as I've ever heard, and he did it as a rancher, as a practicer of great management. The next quote that on the next slide, Neil says that on his ranch, they try to focus on being environmentally sound and economically viable. If you don't do things that are profitable, we won't have anyone here. And if you don't have anyone here on the land, he means, you can't take care of the environment. And that's exactly why we are all here today. And the program, if you'll notice, fits that quote just perfectly. I'm going to bring up another hero of mine to you, and that's on the next slide, and that's Dave Steffen. Dave was from Gregory County, an SDSU alum, Vietnam War veteran. Some themes flow through here, don't they? He worked for the USDA, NRCS, both as a district conservationist, as a range specialist. He helped start the Bootstraps program in Todd and Millette County a long time ago. He was a mentor and a friend and teacher of literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And I'm certainly humbled to have been one of those people. He had a tremendous influence in South Dakota and many, many of the people in this room. And I'm not exaggerating. His work impacted millions of acres of land. So one of the strange things about Dave was he got interested in what's in the next slide, which were dung beetles. 35 years ago, Dave was interested in dung beetles and their role in the ecology of the prairie. And he talked about them all the time, and when we went out walking together, he was looking for dung beetles. I'd be looking at grass or cattle or looking for a good horse or something, and Dave was looking for, this fundamental function that has to occur on the land that's done by this small insect that with something that most of us don't even want to talk about. It's a dung beetle. I'm just so amazed at that how prescient his thinking was. If you go to the next slide, most of us are worried about monarch butterflies. Now they're pretty, not like dung beetles. It's fun to talk about monarch butterflies. The article, though, that was published just a few days ago, March 1st, 2024, is very sobering, and it was published in Science, I think. I wrote it down here. And it's saying that in spite of our best efforts and our passions to save the monarch butterflies, they continue to decline dramatically and very quickly, and that we better wake up, and that our efforts to plant a few milkweeds in our gardens or by some school kids in as a project aren't nearly enough. That the fact is that whether it's a dung beetle whose populations are dramatically declining, or monarch butterflies, or how many other thousand types of insects, those insect populations are dramatically dropping. In fact, in Science magazine just recently, the next slide talks about an insect apocalypse. And maybe that's dramatic, but maybe we better wake up. Dave talked about it with me 35 years ago. 35 years ago, Dave was thinking about it. And I doubt that we can probably be very successful if we don't wake up to some of these very important things. The next slide is a quote from Alan Savory, and it says that ultimately the only wealth that can sustain any community, economy, or nation is derived from the photosynthetic processes, green plants growing and on regenerating soil. So when I heard Savory speak in Lincoln, Nebraska, was the first time I heard the word regenerative. And it's now pretty common to talk about regenerative soils. But it wasn't back when Alan Savory talked about it with me. And another quote from Clarence Nollett: "If our civilization is to survive, all groups, those who live both in rural areas and in the cities, will have to gain a better understanding of the laws of nature, as well as get a better understanding of the links in the food chain. They will need to recognize both the links that are strong and those that are weak." And clearly, Dave Steffen recognized a very weak link. So I've talked about some heroes of the past this morning, and I briefly want to talk about some heroes of today. The first one the next slide, is about Mary Scott. Mary joined us today, so really proud of Mary. Mary was a very young person when Bootstraps was started, and she worked with Dwayne Breyer and Dave Steffen and Jeff Adrian, and got her tremendous background working with those great individuals on the Bootstraps project, and that was started a while ago. She's now an NRCS tribal liaison. She's a ranching background, still runs cattle, a tribal member. I'm just so proud of her. She's still teaching and preaching conservation. And she says in a next quote, "You either find a way or an excuse, it's up to you." So it's up to us. It's up to us to figure this out and work tomorrow afternoon on some policies to find the weakest links and to develop the policies that are required to change them. The next slide is who's next? It's Christy Kamak. And if you go on to the next slide, because I'm going to run out of time here. Christy Kamak and the team at the West River Ag and Extension Center and their $80 million Climate Smart grant, working with ranchers with bison and cattle, figuring out a value chain from the dung beetle and regenerative soils all the way to the consumer. Next slide is about Sean Kelly and Pete Bauman. Two really good friends, and I'm so inspired by them. Sean's from Tripp County. Pete, we imported, but we adopted, an SDSU alum. If you go to the next slide, I'm so proud of their work that was published in South Dakota Magazine last winter in this, one of their headline articles, "Stopping the Green Glacier." They certainly recognized a weak link that Clarence talked about, didn't they? And they're doing something about it. They're actively engaging on solutions and awakening a population. South Dakota Magazine is the most read magazine in South Dakota. Literally tens of thousands of people were positively impacted by that story. So if you go to the next slide, I started out with a collage of books, didn't I? And I'm going to end with a collage of people, because it's people who are going to make the difference. People like Pete and Sean and Christy and Mary, and kind of on top of those people that have passed away. But there's many, many more people. I could have picked a dozen people from this room. Colette Kessler and Judge Jessup could have been up there just doing great work for decades to make this a better place and to take care of our prairies. And I'm just so proud of them and for their lifetime commitment. I'm going to end with a quote from Clarence's book. He said, and it's from a poem, so you can learn a lot of things from Clarence Knowlett, that I'd never heard of before by Muriel Strode, called Wind Wafted Wildflowers. And it says, I will not follow I will not follow where the path may lead, but I will go where there is no path, and I will leave a trail. Certainly those people that I talked about at the beginning, people like my grandfather, or Dave, or Clarence, have left a great path for us to follow. But I encourage you to find paths forward in this really difficult challenges we have around grassland of America, and saving them and preserving them to do all the things that Secretary Roberts talked about so eloquently. So that's my message for today. Thank you again for being here. Thanks for sharing your time with me. It's a privilege and honor to be with you today. I hope you have a great conference.